Good afternoon, everybody. You have just heard a little bit English with a tiny Scottish accent. Now we are going to hear English with a strong Czech accent. So maybe I apologize for it a little bit. I have to say that I'm going to present a kind of argument that is really in early work in progress stage. It's just in a very early stage of my thinking about this problem. And I titled this presentation as Playing Against the Apparatus in Everyday Life and Popular Consumer Culture, some questions and rather tentative answers. In fact, I have plenty of questions and I posted them on the Create page before the symposium, but I succeeded to preliminarily solve just only the first three of these questions because I found them really very, very difficult to get some reasonable answer for them. So my questions that I'm going to deal with are as follows. Could not we consider subversive acts against the program of the apparatus as one of the most essential ways of how we interface with technologies or apparatuses? I understand them as synonyms. Or put it a little bit differently, shouldn't we understand the play with and play against as the essential contradictory dynamic that shapes the nature of apparatus culture and drives its development? If this is not something that is just ubiquitous and play against is not something that is special or like Flusser is writing about it. And what if creative misuse and play against the apparatus is integrated into the program of the apparatus and as such it loses its anti-apparatus potential? So I'm going to think about the idea that when the apparatus swallows the play against itself, it's just going to destroy the anti-apparatus potential of this play. And in fact, I'm going to talk about these questions because of one paradox that I found in Flusser, especially Trvací philosophy of photography. I have to say that for the first time, I read this book just very early after it was translated into Czech. It was, I think, 1994, something like that. And even these some 20 or more years ago, or how many is it? I found this paradox in this book, but I have no reason to solve it. I just thought it's just a strange thing, a kind of provocation. But quite recently, I started to engage with the concept of creative misuse of technologies, and I found this concept also very loosely defined and very loosely used for plenty of things. And I started to think if we want to talk about creative misuse of something, we have to define what is the right use and who defines what is the right use. And if you don't know what is the right use of technologies or objects or anything else, we cannot say that there is some misuse. And I understand the similarities between play against the apparatus and creative misuse of technologies. Between these concepts, I found plenty of similarities, especially regarding this vagueness of the definition of this concept. So let me quote three quotations from Flusser. The camera is programmed to produce photographs, and every photograph is a realization of one of the possibilities contained within the program of the camera. So whatever kind of picture we are going to take, and we can think that we play against the apparatus, it's already there, so we are not playing against it, because it's already in the program. Photographs practice is fixed to a program. Photographers can only act within the program of the camera, even when they think they are acting in opposition to this program. This is explicitly written by Flusser. And then there is third sentence. the informative photographs as opposed to redundant ones. You have talked about this distinction yesterday, as I heard from Tomáš. Photographers consciously playing against the program signify breakthroughs in the photographic universe and are not predicted within the program. So the paradox I feel in these sentences, and I'm not sure, I really don't think about myself as a specialist on Flusser. Maybe I'm just reading it too literally or something like this. But the paradox is, how can we produce informative photographs when we can act only within the program of the camera? I don't know if this paradox is rightly formulated, but I feel it in Flusser's book. So, and because I'm more sociologist than philosopher, and Flusser is more philosopher than sociologist, as we have heard several times today also during the discussions, I tried to solve this problem using some concepts from sociology. And I think that, in fact, the question of playing against the apparatus and playing with the apparatus is in fact very similar to the debate and dilemma dealing with the relation of structure and agency in social theory. It's a question that is about the privacy of structure or privacy of agency. Are we totally determined by structures, or are we free to act against the structure, and are we in fact constructing structures as we are living and playing and acting and doing things? So this is a very old question, stemming back to at least first sociologists, and maybe we can go to much more early ages. But I choose three, or in fact mostly two concepts, one sociological and one, let's say, semiological. But there are plenty of them, plenty of others. We can talk about plenty other authors that deal with similar questions, because it's really a central topic in social sciences, the relation of structure and agency. So, and the first concept is theories of structuration. And the second one is the dialectics of language and speech. I'm going to explain them in two following slides. So I'm going to simplify them a little bit, because especially the theory of structuration, as it is given by Giddens or Bourdieu, or we can maybe consider also Derrida or actor network theory as examples of this solution, are trying to overcome this question of primacy and consider the role of structure and agency in a dialectical way. That is, they construct each other and they make each other possible, and without each other they cannot exist at all. So, put it just briefly and simply, I'm going to read it because it took me a lot of time to formulate it. Giddens, especially in his book The Constitution of Society, that is from 1984, so he's a contemporary of Flusser, in fact. Giddens' theory of structuration notes that social life is more than random individual acts, but is not merely determined by social forces. He thus suggests that human agency and social structure are in a relationship with each other. We cannot conceive them apart from one another. And it is the repetition of the acts of individual agents which reproduces the structure. This means that there is a social structure, traditions, institutions. We can conceive technologies also as structures, apparatuses, rules, tacit knowledge, as we have talked about earlier, etc. But it also means that these can be changed when people start to ignore them, replace them, or reproduce them differently. So there is possibility of change of the structures via the behavior of social actors, and there is also still very strong, and there are also still very strong and powerful structures that structure our behavior. Now it's very maybe thick and theoretical, but after a few slides I'm going to show some images, so it's going to be maybe more graspable. The semiotic argument that is coming from de Saussure's the cours linguistique positive. No, it was wrong name, but never mind. Is quite similar to the Giddens argument, and he deals with the difference between language and speech. And the interaction or relation between language and speech is quite similar in semiology, de Saussure's semiology, as it is in Giddens' sociological theory. De Saussure defines language that it is the systematized set of conventions and linguistic rules necessary to communication. Without language we cannot communicate because language give us rules, conventions, and tells us how we should use the language. Speech, or la parole in French, covers the purely individual application of language and its rules. It is an individual act of selection and actualization of language rules. So, language is a social institution. It's very important. Speech is social agency. We have another dichotomy: social institution versus social agency, ruled by language. That means that individual cannot by himself either create or modify language. So it's not individually possible to modify apparatus, to play against apparatus maybe, or to change it. We can play against it individually, but we cannot change it by individual endeavor, by individual action. It is essentially a collective contract which one must accept in its entirety if one wishes to communicate. So it resists the modification coming from a single individual in another way. And there is no language without speech and no speech outside language. This is the argument about the dialectic relation between language and speech. A language is purely abstract entity, a norm which stands above individuals, a set of essential types which speech actualizes in an infinite variety of ways. But conversely, a language is possible only starting from speech. To some, a language is at the same time the product and the instrument of speech. So the dialectical nature between these dichotomical positions are quite same as in the theory of structuration. So, and based on these theories, I want to ask, how can we understand Flusser's paradox that I talked about in the first slide, when we consider technology or apparatuses as social institutions? I'm asking, in fact, if we can consider technologies as social institutions, and I believe that we can consider them as social institutions. What can we get when we consider technology as produced, reproduced, and transformed in how people use it? And my argument is that informative images are possible as individual or maybe in some cases subcultural acts of resistance, those acts that are not yet used by the whole community of users. Subversive act is subversive prior to the moment it became a generally accepted social phenomenon, that is prior it is incorporated into the program of the apparatus, prior it became a social institution. I tried to put it in a kind of scheme. It's in fact the modification of de Saussure's scheme of interaction between language and speech. And quite important is that in the dialectic between language and speech, de Saussure argues that there are two quite opposite, let's say, movements. One is that in this interaction there is the continuity of language is established in some way. As we are using the language, we are forcing its continuity, its stillness. But at the same time, as we are using the language, we can modify this language slightly. And if enough people for enough long time modify the language, this modification sediments into the structure and changes the structure. And between this moment of sedimentation and first usage of these, let's say, place against the apparatus, there is a kind of liminal in-between space when we play against the apparatus, but it is not yet social institution. It is just, let's say, individual act of some artist or somebody else. And in this moment, I believe that we can produce informative images. But whenever they became social institution, they are not anymore against apparatus because they are part of the apparatus, part of its program. So, and this is one of the definitions of creative misuse that I found one of the best I have found so far. It's from Jason Farman from the book The Mobile Story. And he defines creative misuse as creatively using a technology in a way in which it was never meant to be used, the results of which offer a thoroughly transformed view of the technology, its place in society, and future practices with the technology. I consider quite important the future, because when the future came, the creative misuse is going to be the part of the social institution. So, during last few days, I went again through the Flusser's towards philosophy of photography, and maybe I found something quite similar to this argument, but I'm not really sure. But this quote seems to me quite the same, because he wrote, "A number of human beings are struggling against this automatic programming." And now he defines what they are doing, photographers, critics of photography, philosophers, and so on. And then, however, the apparatuses themselves automatically assimilate these attempts at liberation and enrich their program with them. So, whenever any act of play against the apparatus occurs, it is going to be sooner or later swallowed by the apparatus itself, and it's going to be part of the program. And the subversive potential of this act is just gone, it's just away. So, now I wanted to find illustrations of this power of apparatuses to swallow, to incorporate plays against the apparatus. And I have to say it was quite difficult. And on the theoretical way, I think the argument, or it seems to me right now, is quite consistent. But I think it was also always the problem of Flusser, because as far as I know, he never showed or illustrated any example of photography or any other kind of act of playing with the apparatus. Some concrete material, some empirical material. I'm a sociologist and I like empirical things because they are important for me, not just only philosophical arguments. So, and one example of the power of apparatus, in this case we can consider as apparatus the commercial culture or consumer culture, and on the other side the popular culture. It is very important distinction in cultural studies that was elaborated mainly by, for example, John Fiske. And in fact, I'm taking this example from his book, Understanding Popular Culture. When on the first 20-30 pages, he describes the changing meaning of genes in our Western societies. And it's very thick descriptions, but I picked just only the parts dealing with ripped genes or tall genes. And there is quite, it seems to me quite interesting, because first in the history, tall genes, ripped genes appeared within the subcultures, especially punk subculture, and other human subcultures in Western societies in 1960s, 1970s. And they were considered as act of resistance. They were act of resistance against capitalism, against consumer culture, because especially members of punk subculture, they didn't store their jeans purposely, but they wore them so long that they were just worn out. And that was the reason why there were holes in their jeans. But quite recently, the consumer culture, the commercial part of our society, just acquired this symbol of resistance and made a commodity of it, and very expensive commodity. For example, these jeans from a real shoe cost about 50 pounds. So you can buy these jeans with a kind of symbolic resistance, but it's not the play against the apparatus at all, because these jeans are already the part of the program of the commercial culture. So it's one example. Another one is again incorporation of the popular into the commercial, and the Be on Edge cigarettes, Benson and Hedges. I think we cannot buy them in Czech Republic, but in Western countries you can buy them. On the first side, this is the example of resistance, because in Australia there is quite famous cultural jamming organization, NGO, that is called Billboard, utilizing graffitis against unhealthy promotions, and it's active from 1970s. And this is one of their mostly often mentioned subversion. They just deleted a few letters in the Benson and Hedges, and we now have the statement "Be on edge." So when we are smoking, we are on edge. We can very soon be dead. But what happened around 2000 or 2004 or something like this, in F1 competition, it was banned to use advertisement for cigarettes on cars, on these fast cars, and especially Jordan's I don't know how to say style in Czech. No, it's okay. Jordan's cars were sponsored by Benson and Hedges, and they used this previously subversive act, and they deleted these letters on their cars. So they are still sponsored by Benson and Hedges, but they don't have advertisement for Benson and Hedges on their cars. But everybody reads it at Benson and Hedges. Another example I found in the campus of University of South Bohemia, that was some 5-6 years. It was built totally new. There are two new buildings. This is the library, and this is the rectorate, where is the office of the head of the university. And the architects just draw on their plans all these white roads. But just very early after the campus was given to the use of the students, on these green lawns, suddenly the small walks and small mud walks appeared. And what happened next, in about 2 or 3 years, when everybody has a mark on his shoes, they just realized that they are going to put them some concrete or something like this. So they just used these lines that were subversively written on the ground by the users of the campus in the University of South Bohemia. And so now there are also routes you can walk, not on the grass. Another, I think it's last or maybe one before last, example is incorporation of, let's say, of academic or activist play against the apparatus and the commercial usage of this play against of this academic play, especially feminist. These are the advertisements from of French shoe company Aram, and in around 2000 they were strongly criticized that they use women on their advertisement, and they objectifize them, and that they just exploit them, the usual feminist critic of advertisements. And so they reacted this beautiful way. The slogan says that no women's body was exploited on this advertisement. And everybody reads it in this beautiful dialectic of subversion of critic, of feminist critic, and now what the firm, what the commercial business did with this subversive act of feminism, let's say. What I found is very close to informative images in this liminal in-between space can be, in my view, all plenty of do-it-yourself objects that are, especially in Czech Republic, before Velvet Revolution, it was a kind of national tradition to be good in do-it-yourself objects. And in fact, these images are taken from one of 2 or 3 museums of do-it-yourself object that appears in Czech Republic quite recently. And they are totally good. We can use, for example, the concept of bricolage from Lévi-Strauss here, because they are using objects previously planned and designed for something. They are using them for something else. So, for example, the lawn mower is made partly from the wheelchair and from all other different parts that has previously different usage or different purpose. So, my conclusion is that informative images are thinkable only as a kind of in-between liminal images before they became social institutions. At the moment of an informative image is incorporated into the program of the apparatus, it loses its power to subvert the structure because it becomes the part of the structure, and structure can be changed only in expense of sustaining structure itself. So if the play against the apparatus became the part of the structure, it can change it, but it's not subversive at all because it's part of the program of the apparatus. So I hope it was comprehensible and